Mina Murray's journal, 6th of August. This suspense is getting dreadful. The fishermen say that we are in for a storm. Today is a grey day. Everything is grey. Grey earthy rock, grey clouds tinged with the sunburst at the far edge hang over the grey sea, into which the sandpoints stretch like grey fingers. The sea is tumbling in over the shallows and the sandy flats with a roar, muffled in the sea mists drifting inland. There is a brool over the sea that sounds like some presage of doom. Whenever someone would ask me a question like, "What's your favourite novel?" I'd always find it a really difficult thing to answer, until relatively recently when I realised there is only one obvious answer. It's the book that I've read the most, it's the book that I definitely plan to read again, it's the book that inspires me when I do my own fiction writing, it's the book that I never tire of consuming in other forms of media, be it film and TV or games, and it's the book that I have owned multiple copies of. So, having made that realisation, I really wanted to investigate its origins. Irish author Bram Stoker was nearly 50 years old when he published the ultimate Gothic horror novel, Dracula, in 1897. Its tale of the ancient Transylvanian count, an evil vampire with power over creatures and darkness, still resonates today as the definitive vampire tale. But Stoker didn't write the novel overnight. He had been the business manager of the Lyceum Theatre in London for over a decade when, after a particularly exhausting theatrical tour of Scotland, he was recommended to take a holiday in the coastal town of Whitby in Yorkshire on the northeast coast of England. It was 1890, and he already had the idea for writing a supernatural mystery novel about a Count Vampire from Styria, but the novel would take its true shape, and in turn shape horror fiction, by what he found in Whitby. This hauntingly beautiful coastal town, not Transylvania, is where Dracula was conceived. So here I am in Whitby Station, travelling here by train just as Bram Stoker would have done over a century ago in 1890 when he came to stay here for just a month from July to August, just at the time of year that I'm here. And although I'm arriving at night, and I'm pretty sure he would have arrived during the day, the immediate impression is of, especially at night, Victorian Gothic, and it's already easy to imagine how Bram Stoker would have been inspired to create a dark romantic novel like Dracula. But it's so easy to come here and see the same streets, walk the same paths that Bram Stoker did well over a century ago. Pictures and footage don't really give you a proper impression of how steep this hill is. In fact, even to the naked eye, it looks much less steep than it really is. And there's a lot more to go. Once the sun rises over the town, you're reminded of why visitors, both before and after Bram Stoker, never forget this place. Just as in 1890, the Abbey dominates the town. Wherever you are, the 800-year-old ruins aren't far out of view, forming a dramatic backdrop to all the sights. It looms even over the heads of the many tourists that crowd the narrow streets. Although it can be difficult to move quickly through the herd, I can't blame them for coming here. Whitby has a multitude of beautiful buildings, independent shops, and places to eat to divert you. The local businesses know their audience, taking full advantage of the town's connection to Stoker's creation. A popular tourist trap is this spooky haunted house experience, with, obviously, Dracula. It looks pretty cool. I'm pretty sure they officially licensed the logo and imagery from the 1992 film. Dracula's Dream Fudge. Okay, let's try a bit, which is an appropriately fang-shaped bit of chocolate fudge with strawberry fudge on the other side. Very witty. See what they've done there? That is sweet. That is really sweet. Oof. But Whitby isn't just a tacky tourist town, it's rightfully proud of its heritage. There's a trail of commemorative statues to discover in the streets, whether of a photographer who immortalised the locals who worked at the docks, the first female skipper of a fishing boat on the northeast coast, Dora Walker, or William Scoresby, the inventor of the crow's nest. The old Wesleyan chapel is home to the Jet Museum, a treasure trove of jewellery made from the blackest gemstone formed from the fossilised Jurassic-era ancestor of the monkey puzzle tree. Jet is plentiful in the Whitby coast and was used as far back as the Bronze Age, but reached its peak popularity in the Victorian era when Queen Victoria herself established its suitability to wear when in mourning. The town's pride in its past is clear from the way they've both preserved historic exteriors and from the way they've modelled modern interiors. Some of the historical authenticity is questionable. Bar and grill. There's also a cafe named after Sherlock Holmes, who has no connection to Whitby whatsoever other than some 20th century spin-off novels where he chases down Dracula. Still, the march of time haunts Whitby. For every impressively old building you encounter, another stands not far away, and around each corner there is usually something even older. To reach the oldest part of the town, you have to cross the River Esk that divides it. To do this, you have to cross a swing bridge, just as Bram Stoker did, although this bridge replaced the Victorian one in 1908. Whitby is definitely a place for those who like to stroll, and the most direct route to the Abbey is up what locals call Jacob's Ladder, the famous 199 steps. 199 steps all the way up to the Abbey. Let's go. There is some debate over exactly how many steps there are, but it doesn't really matter. They're still tiring to climb, and a couple of benches offer respite for weary walkers, although these were originally installed for coffin bearers to rest their dead heavy cargo on the procession uphill. Mina Murray's journal, 24th of July. The steps are a great feature of the place. They lead from the town up to the church. There are hundreds of them, I do not know how many, and they wind up in a delicate curve. The slope is so gentle that a horse could easily walk up and down them. 11th of August. The time and distance seemed endless, and my knees trembled and my breath came laboured as I toiled up the endless steps to the Abbey. At the top of the staircase, the 12th century church of St. Mary's greets you, replete with its countless gravestones. Since his landlady wouldn't let him stay in the rooms that he'd rented in the Crescent during the daytime, it is here that Bram Stoker and his fictional heroine, Mina Murray, spent much of their daylight hours in 1890s Whitby. Indeed, several scenes in the book are set on the bench here, and you can still sit and admire the view along the coast that Stoker describes in the novel. However, make sure to turn to your left when you arrive at the top of the stairs, because close to Jacob's Ladder is Cadmon's Cross. This fantastic stone cross may look medieval, but it was actually put up in 1898, just a year after Dracula was published, and they were raising the funds for it whilst Dracula was being published. It cost about £250 back then, which is £22,500 today. It was all in praise of Cadmon, widely considered to be England's first poet, although he wrote in Old English, not modern English. Bram Stoker didn't just find inspiration for the mythical in Whitby, he also found inspiration for the more mundane, such as the names of characters in the book. Those of you who remember the passages set in St. Mary's churchyard in Whitby will remember that Mina Murray, the heroine of the book, meets an old man called Mr. Swales, who will later become the first victim of Dracula on English shores. And where did the name Swales come from? The Swales family. About a minute's walk from St. Mary's Church lie the ruins of Whitby Abbey. Founded in AD 657 and first led by St. Hilda, who Cadmon probably recited his poetry to, the Anglo-Saxon abbey was destroyed by Vikings in the 9th century and rebuilt by the Normans in the 13th century, only to be destroyed once and for all by Henry VIII when he broke from the Catholic Church. Today, the abbey is run by English Heritage, and for a modest entry fee you can wander round the ruins and go through the fantastic museum. Legend has it that a white lady can be sometimes seen roaming the ruins. Perhaps the ghost of St. Hilda herself? The story of the White Lady of the Abbey isn't Whitby's only legend. There is also the Bar Guest, a monstrous black dog with haunting eyes that stalks the countryside around Whitby. To hear its howl is to know your life will end by dawn. This myth almost certainly inspired Bram Stoker to give Dracula the power to transform into a great black dog. Closer to the train station, in Whitby Museum, you can find Britain's only known example of another gruesome piece of folklore. In one corner of this vast collection rests the Hand of Glory. The dried and pickled hand of a gibbeted criminal, tradition says that once enchanted, a burglar could use it as a candle and it would send his victims into a paralytic sleep, leaving him to carry out his thievery undisturbed. This hand was found hidden in the wall of a cottage further up the River Esk and donated to the museum in 1935. Creepy. Walking between the aged buildings and through the cramped alleyways of the town, it's easy to succumb to the idea that some legends may not be merely legends after all. Yet, it's important not to think of Whitby as a town buried in the past. It's still a functioning harbour, as it was in Bram Stoker's day, dealing especially in fish.
Kippers smoked fresh here every day. The smell is strong. I hate fish.
It is also host to a living tradition. If you visit in late August, you can enjoy Whitby Folk Week, 7 days of celebration of music, storytelling, crafts, and, of course, Morris dancing. You can watch these hard-working and talented people practicing their art at various locations through the town and processing through the streets. There are many traditions, or styles, represented here. There's Northwest, famous for its energetic clog steps, its large bands, and, especially in the case of Kenilworth Morris, great outfits as well as great dancing. There's Rapper, a tight-knit, acrobatic dance with short swords that, like the dancers themselves, is well suited to pubs. And there's Cotswold, probably the style you think of first when you imagine Morris dancers, a group of men dancing in bells and hankies. But they don't have to use hankies, and they don't have to be men. Windsor Morris is one of the longest established women's sides in the country. They actually perform their own style of Morris dancing that blends several other traditions, which they call Windsor-on-Thames. In fact, many Morris sides have their own style, including these folks, the Flag and Bone Gang, who formed in the mid-1990s and who use bone knickknacks instead of bells and cover their faces in a tradition that old manuscripts suggest Morris dancers habitually did to hide their identities. There are also a couple of goth festivals each year in Whitby, probably the most direct expression of Bram Stoker's legacy, but I like to think that Stoker himself would more likely have seen Morris dancers than goths in his time. Despite all the modern cars and the tourists with their 21st century gear, and that includes me by the way, there's still a sense of history about Whitby and a powerful sense of the Victorian. In the novel Dracula, Mina Murray stays at the Crescent, the same place Stoker stayed when he visited.
Here it is, number 6 Royal Crescent, where Bram Stoker and his family stayed for a month in 1890, finding inspiration for Dracula. In fact, number 7 Royal Crescent is the address of Dracula's solicitor in the book. I wonder if he didn't like his neighbours whilst he was here.
You can stay in the top rooms of the building, called Bram's View. Apparently the decor is a kitsch Gothic love letter to Dracula. About a minute's walk around the corner from Bram's View is a tribute to one of Whitby's homegrown historical heroes, Captain James Cook. The son of a local farm labourer, Cook became a merchant navy apprentice in what is now the Captain Cook Museum in Whitby. He went on to become the epitome of an explorer, becoming the first European to discover Hawaii, the first person to circumnavigate New Zealand, and the first to map the coasts of Newfoundland and Australia. The Captain Cook Monument is surrounded by many benches. If you're patient and follow the trail along the hilltop, you'll reach a particularly special bench.
Here I am on the commemorative bench on the very spot where Bram Stoker would have sat and looked out over the harbour of Whitby. And when you look at what he saw all those years ago, you can see the words on the pages brought to life. You can see Collier's Hope or Tate Hill Sands, where the Demeter comes to shipwreck, and from which the gigantic beast-like hound leaps up the 199 steps towards Whitby Abbey's ruins.
Well-educated and a former civil servant with some experience writing for the newspapers, Stoker knew how to describe what he saw and knew the value of research. The novel's famous chapter in which the Demeter, a Russian sailing ship, unknowingly brings Dracula and boxes of earth from his homeland to Whitby, only for the vampire to kill and feed on the skeleton crew until all the captain can do is lash himself to the ship's wheel with a crucifix, guiding the boat through stormy weather till it runs aground Tate Hill Sands, was almost certainly inspired by the wreck of the Dmitri. The real-life Russian schooner was blown by a fierce storm onto that very beach with a cargo of silver sand, which is used in gardening and some industry. The Dmitri set sail from Narva in Estonia. The Demeter sailed from Varna in Bulgaria. Sometimes all it takes is to change a few letters around. Bram Stoker's view from the benches overlooks the long piers at the mouth of the harbour. These were relatively recent when Stoker saw them. The West Lighthouse was completed in 1831, and the East Lighthouse was finished in 1854. Naturally, there are stories about the Western Lighthouse, which is the tallest lighthouse, of people seeing a ghostly figure at night up at the top, or a dead body down on the ground at the foot of the steps near the doorway. The story goes that a lighthouse keeper heroically sacrificed himself in the middle of a stormy night, going up there to reignite the torch that had blown out because of the strong winds, which you can still experience right now. But the rain was so heavy that his soaked, drenched coat dripped all over the stairs, and on his way back down he slipped and fell to his death. This tunnel here is also supposed to be a place of strange and spooky goings-on. Let's come back at night to find out. It's after midnight and I'm here alone outside this tunnel, which is called the Screaming Tunnel because of the spooky screams that locals have heard coming through it. I have my suspicions it might just be seagulls, but who knows? It's also known as Dracula's Tunnel, but to be honest, for no good reason, just because Dracula is associated with Whitby. However, some locals claim to have seen a dark figure lurking at the other end of the passage when they walk through alone at night. So, let's see what happens when I go through it. Here we go. First thing you might notice is that once I'm inside, it's pretty dark in here. It's very dark. In fact, it's so dark you probably can't even get the camera to focus on me. I can't see what I'm doing. Can't see where I'm putting my feet. It's quite terrifying. The slope is quite steep. I'm all alone. There's no one here. And when I get to the end, which, thankfully I am at the end, what do I see except... I'm definitely not going to risk going down there. In the daylight, those spooky stairs lead down to more cute back streets, which complete the route from the Cook Monument and the Royal Hotel, where Stoker spent much time in the reading room, to the Quayside building, which was built as a bathhouse in the 1820s. In 1890, this was the public library where Bram Stoker came to spend some of his time, and whilst he was in here, he came across a book by William Wilkinson. In that book, he recounted the story of a particularly brutal 15th century prince known locally as the Son of the Devil, or, in the local language, Dracula. Today, it's a chip shop. I don't really feel like fish and chips. I could think of something better. This is a deep-fried Mars bar. Chocolate-flavoured mallow, caramel, covered in chocolate, and put in batter. Very British, and very Northern British. That's amazing, but also really disgusting. I'm going to enjoy this. Bram Stoker wasn't the only author to be inspired by Whitby. Charles Ludwig Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, the creator of Alice in Wonderland, stayed here on 6 different visits in the middle of the 19th century, and Bram Stoker probably knew about it. In fact, the famous poem, The Walrus and the Carpenter, is said to have been inspired by stories of people on Whitby Beach. More recently, Philip Pullman took inspiration from the story of the polar bear that local explorer William Scoresby, that's right, the crow's nest fella, tamed and brought back to Whitby with him. It's time to say farewell to Whitby. As I leave from the train station, this time in daylight, I discover one more tribute to Bram Stoker's literary skill that comes to mind as I look out of the window. To paraphrase, the River Esk runs through a deep valley. A great viaduct runs across it with high piers through which the view seems somehow further away than it really is. The valley is beautifully green. This is a lovely place. I couldn't agree more. You know you've made it to real England when you come across pub signs like these. Best meal in the world,
This is in praise of Cadmon, widely considered to be England's first poet. He was a 7th century monk who lived here in Whitby Abbey. This is the bells of St Mary's Church you can hear as I speak, and he's great.